Welcome to Sweeter Than Honey. Today's devotional chapter is Psalm 20. As we come to Psalm 20, I'd call your attention to verse 7, which to me is what, when I'm thinking through the Psalms, this is the verse that I remember and memorize from Psalm 20. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. What would you trust in beside the Lord? Before we go much further, let's start back up with verse 1. Verse 1, you see the desire for God's provision toward not only the writer, but toward anyone who wants to be counted among God's people. May the Lord answer you. So you see that he's talking to another party. May the Lord answer you in the day of trouble. May the name of the Lord, the God of Jacob, protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and give you support from Zion. May he remember all your offerings and regard with favor your burnt sacrifices. May he grant you your heart's desire and fulfill all your plans. May we, that is the rest of us, may we shout for joy over your salvation, and in the name of our God set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. So just notice the may he's in this passage. May he answer you, protect you, send you help, give you support, remember all your offerings, regard with favor your burnt sacrifices. May we shout for joy over your salvation, and in the name of our God set up our banners, and then may he, once again, fulfill all your petitions. Not only is there the desire for God's provision, but then there is an examination of the wisdom of trusting in the Lord. Starting in verse 6. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. David knows this because it had happened to him over and over again. We can know this because we have read from Genesis, how God preserved Abraham, and in Genesis, how God preserved Jacob, and in Genesis, how God preserved Joseph, and in Exodus, how God preserved Moses, in Judges, God's preservation of Israel through multiple judges. You see this over and over throughout the history of Israel, and one of the devices that the people of Israel used in training their young people was to rehearse the history of the nation to show that they were a people that were favored by God, and that God's past with them shows them that they ought to trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord is not some blind leap in the dark. It is an intelligent step into the light based on the evidence of the history that we have with our God. It is wise to trust in the name of our God. He continues speaking of the knowledge that the Lord saves, trust that the Lord saves, and the experience that the Lord saves. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with the saving might of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. Trust that the Lord saves. And then the experience that the Lord saves. They collapse and fall, but we rise and stand up. What is the ultimate knowledge, experience of God's victory? Is to be there as God is victorious over his enemies. Then the third section, verse 9, is the final call to the Lord. O Lord, save the king. May he answer us when we call. Final thoughts. What is it that you tend to trust more than the Lord? As you consider, memorize verse 7, and I would tell you that you need to include Psalm 20, verse 7, as one of the memory verses that you commit to memory, that you embed in your heart and your mind. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. As he writes that, when he speaks of chariots and horses, he's speaking in military terms. So David's chariots and horses in Psalms are our tanks and missiles today. Some trust in guns and tanks and missiles, but we will trust in the name of the Lord our God. And just as much as we may be tempted to dismiss prayer and trust and faith in favor of modern weaponry, the horses and the chariots were their modern weaponry back then. Do you trust in your gun, bullets, tanks, missiles, government, your wealth, your strength, your intelligence? What is it that you depend on first? Because if you're going to be realistic, your first and final trust should be in the Lord. What is something that you want God to give you that He can't give you? There's nothing. Or you may say, God won't give me something. Do you trust Him enough to trust His decision not to give it? Are there advantages in trusting something else over trusting God? You might say, well, there are immediate advantages because it lets me do what I want to do. But ultimately, trusting God leads us to live the kind of life that reflects that trust, that demonstrates that trust to all the world. It doesn't mean that we live foolishly. It does mean that we live with our final, ultimate trust in God, and that we're willing to go against conventional wisdom, and we are willing to live counterculturally if it means living for God, living in trusting in the name of the Lord our God. May this God, whose name is worthy of our trust, bless you and keep you and cause His face to shine upon you and give you peace. We know these things are true because this is the Word of God.